Hello and welcome to Stand Up for Jehovah. When I was younger and I used to go out on field service, if you were lucky enough to get paired up with a raddled old elder, he sometimes used to say at the doors, "Hello, is the head of the household in?" And I always used to think how terribly old-fashioned that was, the head of the household. And like the household would be like, "Eh, what? Oh, who?" Because they had no concept that this misogynistic old-fashioned idea was a thing. Sometimes he'd ask for the man of the house. Is the man of the house in? And you know, I honestly think that even as a teenager, I did occasionally ask that myself. Now, I never really thought Jehovah's Witnesses was a misogynistic religion at all. I mean, there were clues that I could have picked up on, but for some reason I didn't. So there was the whole thing about sisters giving talks and having to sit sideways on and talk to another lady because if they faced the congregation, that was too much like teaching. Oh, no, very dangerous that. Don't you worry your pretty little head about that, darling. You just face sideways. And then there was the whole tea towel on your head business, wasn't there? If there was a 10-year-old boy in the room, you had to defer to his superior maleness. I should have picked up on it, but I didn't. I think because I thought that we were all going to paradise and that we'd all be perfect, I kind of imagined that we would all be equal and that we wouldn't need an authority structure because we'd be perfect, right? So we wouldn't need anyone telling us what to do. We'd be perfect. I didn't realise that having a vagina entitled you to a third-class seat at the table of fun in paradise. I was aware that God had quirky, odd problems with women. He seemed to have like an anti-fetish about seeing the tops of our heads. He really didn't like that. I refer you back to the tea towel situation. And he also had problems with the business end of ladies as well. If you had a girl baby come out of your vagina, you were unclean for 4 times longer than if you had a boy baby come out of that particular receptacle. Dirty, dirty girls. What was God's problem? He made us. That's so unfair. So I was vaguely aware that there were odd things, but that was the Old Testament. There was a great thing in our congregation about this head of the household thing. There was an old couple and a single sister, very old, who all lived in sheltered accommodation in different parts, but under the same umbrella roof. And the old man, despite being a wishy-washy witness, just rocking up every other Sunday and never going out on field service, he had a real bee in his bonnet about being the head of the house. And because the sister who lived on her own didn't have a head, she didn't have a head. She had a head, just wasn't a male head, because she didn't have a head of her house. He used to insist on being the head of her house. It used to make me laugh even when they're really old and decrepit, boinking around on Zimmer frames. They've still got this ridiculous notion that they're somehow more important than someone else, and it did cause a fair bit of friction with that lady because she was quite strong-willed and I don't think she'd been married for about 100 years. So what vaguely used to upset me, and when I say vaguely, I really mean that it made me want to stab someone in the fucking face about it, was the word submission. Now, submission to me has distinctly sexual overtones. Yeah, it is possible for you to advertise for a sub in certain dating sites, and I'm fairly convinced that they're not looking for a Jehovah's Witness wife. So in the normal situation, the couple involved can decide between them who's going to be the sub and who's going to be the dom. But in Jehovah world, Jehovah decides who's going to be the sub, and every fucking time it's the person who forgot to grow a penis. What are the odds? Every time you get told you're the sub. I used to hate that word. Also, Jehovah's Witnesses used to contort themselves in talk to try and make submission not sound as if it had come straight from the 13th century from a village idiot. But they couldn't. They really used to try and make it sound nice and cuddly and loving. And when I thought about submission, I always had like a flashback to an animal documentary. You know where the male lion is sat on top of the female lion, biting the back of her neck and humping her, and she's underneath him spitting and growling and hissing and looking like she'd want to rip his face off if he'd chosen a more traditional missionary position so she could get to him. And that was my vision of submission. And that expression on that lady lion's face was how I felt a lot of Jehovah's Witness women felt about submission. So I am going to tell you 2 stories of casual misogyny. Nothing particularly horrible, nothing really awful, just that kind of constant drip, drip, drip that you have every day that makes you fantasize about whether you're going to be Thelma or Louise. Obviously I'm Louise. So here's the first story. When I was about 14, we were doing up our Kingdom Hall, and we were going down there at weekends and painting it and decorating it and what have you. And I was down there one Saturday, and there were a group of all sorts of people and a group of elders. And I must have cracked a joke or something, or perhaps behaved a bit coquettishly. Don't think so. I wasn't really a coquettish kind of a person. I was more like a raucous, throw your head back and have a belly laugh kind of a person. Anyway, I'd made some kind of comment, and then an old, raddled old elder smacked me on the bum and said, "Ooh, if I was 20 years younger." Now, he was about 70, and disturbingly, I was both fascinated and repulsed by this whole situation. And I did that kind of giggly thing that you do and you want to fucking stab someone in the face, but you don't have the vocabulary or a sharp knife to hand. Now, here's the thing. If he had have been 20 years younger, he still would have been 50 to my 14, which still would have put him fairly firmly on the paedophile domain of the Venn diagram of sexual harassment. He would have needed to be 56 years younger for this to be anywhere near appropriate. And even then, I don't think it would have fitted on the overlap between appropriate and consensual on the Venn diagram. It doesn't roll off your tongue, does it? Oh, if I was 56 years younger and possibly good looking, and I'd ask you for consent to touch your bottom. So that was that. My other story is not even from a Jehovah's Witness elder, it's from an ex-elder. Oh, you naughty, naughty men, I have issues with you assumed authority people who've lived it all your life and don't even realise how much you have just this casual notion that your ability to have grown a penis quite cleverly, unlike me, didn't think of it, has given you this authority. So this is what happened on the podcast that I do. An ex-Jehovah's Witness elder said how when he was an elder, he used to tease the sisters in his congregation by quoting that scripture from the second book of Chauvinistics from the woman-hating Apostle Paul, who used to say, "I desire the sisters to remain silent." Stops being funny after about the millionth fucking time you have heard it. And when you've lived it all your life, all your childhood, all your teenage years, all your life, it just loses its funny, and it really, really triggers me quite a lot. So, because I forgot to grow a cock when I was born, that means that I get to be treated like a naughty little learning deficient girl who needs an adult to tell me when to use my words. It's almost like the Bible was written by a feeble-minded, weak, pathetic, power-hungry little shop floor union man who was both fascinated and repulsed by breasts simultaneously and needed some kind of system to keep these girls under control, to keep 50% of the population knowing their celestial pecking order position, a little bit above cattle but a little bit below prepubescent boys. Thank you for listening to another episode of Stand Up for Jehovah.